Somewhere in the dusty annals of history, among millions of forgotten artifacts from one of humanity's darkest periods, rested a single photograph. Taken in 1942 in black and white, the image appeared at first glance entirely ordinary for its time. 3 German soldiers, members of the Wehrmacht, posing for the camera somewhere in a war-torn Europe. The photograph itself was not remarkable for its composition or technical quality. On the contrary, its apparent banality was what made it such an authentic fragment of that era. It was a snapshot of the daily life of men serving a monstrous ideology. For over 7 decades, it remained a silent testament, a small piece of photographic paper that carried the weight of an infamous regime, waiting for someone to look closer and discover the extraordinary truth hidden in plain sight. The 3 men in the photo stand side by side, framed from the waist up. Their uniforms are impeccable, adorned with the eagle and the swastika, symbols that still evoke a shiver of revulsion today. The soldier on the left, the tallest, displays an almost arrogant smile, an air of youthful confidence that contradicts the horror of the conflict surrounding him. The one in the middle, with a sterner face and a focused gaze, appears to be the oldest, perhaps a low-ranking officer with a rigid posture that suggests discipline. The third soldier, on the right, is the most enigmatic. His face is slightly turned, almost in profile, and a faint smile hovers on his lips, but it doesn't reach his eyes. His eyes, even in the grainy image, seem to carry a depth and ambiguity that the other 2 lack. Together they form a trio that could be any group of soldiers on any battlefront. To understand the power of this image, we must transport ourselves to its context. The year was 1942. The Nazi war machine was at the height of its power, sweeping across Europe with systematic brutality. The concentration and extermination camps operated with terrifying efficiency, and the Third Reich's ideology of hate poisoned every aspect of life. In this world, a German soldier was seen as an enforcer of this will, a pillar of an empire built on oppression and genocide. Every uniform, every salute, every photograph was an affirmation of this power. Therefore, an image of 3 soldiers posing with apparent camaraderie was, in its essence, a propaganda document, a normalization of the unacceptable. History, however, is rarely as simple as it seems, and official narratives often hide human complexities that challenge our assumptions. The photograph's journey after the war is a saga in itself. It wasn't found in a carefully preserved family album, but rather inside an old metal trunk bought at a Berlin flea market, decades after the fall of the wall. The trunk belonged to a scrap collector who had no idea of its contents. Inside, among rusted medals and yellowed documents, was the photograph. It passed from hand to hand, a curious object of no apparent value, until it was acquired by a small local historical archive dedicated to preserving the everyday memories of the war. There, it was catalogued and digitized, becoming just one more file among thousands, a data point in a vast digital ocean of lost memories, patiently waiting for the technology and the right eye that could unravel its secret. This digital journey led it, 75 years after it was taken, to the computer screen of Dr. Eleanor Vogel, a historian and image analysis expert at the Institute of Contemporary History in Munich. Her project was monumental, to use artificial intelligence to analyze and categorize thousands of undocumented war photographs. The image of the 3 soldiers appeared in her processing queue as File 734. Elena's first impression was the same as everyone else's before her. It was a standard photo, almost a cliché of Wehrmacht propaganda. She was about to tag it with the keywords soldiers, uniform, World War II, and move on to the next one. However, something made her stop. An almost imperceptible detail, an inexplicable feeling that there was something more to that seemingly simple scene, made her pause and enlarge the image for the first time. The decision to investigate further was not based on concrete evidence, but on an intuition, the same intuition that separates a historical discovery from simple cataloguing. Elena felt a dissonance in the image, a subtle tension between the figures and what they represented. Why did the soldier on the right seem so out of place? Why was his smile so different from the others? These were questions that could not be answered superficially. She summoned her small team, a digital restoration specialist and a military historian. The initial goal was modest: simply to clean up the image to see if they could get more clarity on the details of the uniforms or the background. They weren't looking for a history-changing revelation. They were just doing their jobs diligently. But as they applied the first filters, the past began to whisper its secrets in a way no one could have predicted. The process began with a scan at a breathtaking resolution, far beyond anything available to public archives. Every square centimeter of the photograph was captured in billions of pixels, transforming the small paper image into a vast digital panorama. The team could now travel inside the photo. They saw the texture of the woolen fabric of the uniforms, the small frayed fibers on the middle soldier's collar. They saw the dust accumulated on the boots, which were now visible at the bottom of the frame. They saw the grain of the men's skin, the small scars and imperfections that made them painfully human. The technology allowed them to transcend time, becoming almost present observers of the scene. Each new detail, no matter how mundane it seemed, heightened the feeling that the truth was right there, hidden under layers of photographic emulsion and decades of oblivion, waiting to be rediscovered. It was the team's military historian, an elderly man named Klaus, who noticed the first anomaly. His eyes, trained by a lifetime of studying war artifacts, detected a minuscule irregularity. "Wait," he murmured, pointing at the screen. "Look at the breast insignia of the soldier on the right, the eagle." To a layman, it looked perfectly normal, but to Klaus, something was wrong. The stitching was slightly different from the Wehrmacht-issued standard. It was cruder, almost as if it had been applied by hand, and the angle of the eagle's head was a few millimeters off from the regulation design. It was a small, perhaps trivial defect that could be attributed to a late-war production uniform. But combined with the soldier's enigmatic gaze, this small imperfection sowed the first real seed of doubt. It was a loose thread in the fabric of the official narrative. Intrigued, they turned their attention to the photograph's background. Behind the soldiers, the E scene was blurry but distinguishable. It appeared to be the wall of a stone building, perhaps a farmhouse or a church. In one corner, there was a dark spot that could be a wooden sign or a shadow. "Zoom in there. Try to enhance that area," Elena requested. The image technician worked the controls, applying algorithms to reduce the blur and increase the contrast. Slowly, the spot began to take shape. They were letters, crudely painted on the wall, but the passage of time and the quality of the original lens made them almost illegible. There seemed to be a V and maybe an L. The team debated the possibilities. Could it be the name of a village, a code word? The inability to decipher the message only deepened the mystery, turning the photo's background into a frustrating puzzle. The analysis returned to the men's faces, now under psychological scrutiny. The expression of the soldier on the left, once seen as arrogant, now seemed forced, like a poorly fitted mask. His smile had no warmth. It was a performance for the camera. The middle soldier, with his stern gaze, seemed to be observing something out of frame, his jaw clenched in tension, not discipline. But it was the soldier on the right, the original focus of suspicion, who was most intriguing. Under extreme magnification, his slight smile appeared melancholic, almost sad, and in his eyes, the team no longer saw ambiguity, but a clear and overwhelming emotion that had been invisible before. Fear. A deep, controlled fear. The photograph was no longer a portrait of camaraderie, but a stage of complex and hidden emotions. Each soldier was playing a role, and the team needed to find out what the script was. Feeling they were at the limit of what conventional technology could offer, Elena made a bold decision. She contacted a partner lab that was developing new image enhancement software based on neural networks. The artificial intelligence had been trained on millions of images to recognize patterns and reconstruct details that were impossible for the human eye or standard algorithms to see. It was experimental technology, and the results were unpredictable. The team gathered in the projection room, the photograph enlarged on an entire wall. They sent the file and the process began. On the screen, a timer indicated the progress, while the hum of the servers filled the tense silence of the room. They were asking a machine to see what 75 years of history had hidden. After several minutes of intense processing, the image on the screen flickered and redefined itself. The clarity was astonishing. The noise and grain had been reduced, and details that were once blurry were now sharp. The team's gaze was immediately drawn to the hand of the soldier on the right, which was resting on the barrel of his rifle. Before, it seemed to be just a hand. Now, with the AI's clarity, something became visible on the inside of his wrist, partially obscured by his uniform sleeve. It wasn't a tattoo, but a mark, scratched or drawn onto the skin. The team held their breath collectively as the technician zoomed in further. There, unequivocal and shocking, was a small, crudely drawn Star of David, a Nazi soldier in the middle of 1942, marked with the symbol of his declared enemy. The silence in the room was absolute. The revelation hung in the air of the dark room, heavy and incomprehensible. A Star of David on the wrist of a Wehrmacht soldier. It was a paradox that defied everything they knew about the rigid and murderous ideology of the Third Reich. Dr. Elena Vogel's mind struggled to process the image. How was this possible? The persecution of Jews was the cornerstone of Nazism. A Jew could not serve in the German army, let alone pose for a photo with a symbol of his faith so dangerously exposed. The initial shock gave way to a whirlwind of questions. Was it a form of secret defiance? A message for someone? Or proof of a story far darker and more complex than any of them could have imagined? The photograph had transformed from a historical artifact into a glaring anomaly, a piece that simply did not fit into the puzzle of history. The debate in the room began immediately, the voices a mix of academic excitement and solemn reverence. He must have been a Mischling, suggested Klaus, the military historian, using the Nazi term for people of mixed Jewish and Aryan ancestry. Some served early in the war, before the laws became even stricter. Perhaps he was hiding his full identity. Another theory emerged. Maybe he wasn't Jewish, but was doing it in solidarity, a silent act of defiance. Or the most dangerous hypothesis of all, maybe he was a member of the resistance, an infiltrator. Each possibility opened a new path of investigation, each more perilous than the last. The team realized they were no longer just analyzing a photo. They were on the verge of unearthing the life of a man who lived on a razor's edge, balancing on an abyss of deadly secrets. The priority became clear. They needed a name. Identity was the key to unlocking the truth. The team began a frantic and meticulous search through digitized German military archives, using the approximate location, based on the flora and architecture in the background, and the year 1942, they started cross-referencing units that operated in that region. They analyzed the uniform details again, looking for any divisional or regimental insignia that might have been missed. The search was like looking for a needle in a haystack of millions of names. Nights turned into days as they scoured service records, casualty lists, and disciplinary files, hoping for any name that could be linked to an irregularity, anything that would make him stand out from the mass of obedient soldiers. Finally, after days of exhaustive searching, they found a promising match, a soldier named Private Klaus Richter. He had served in an infantry unit that was stationed in eastern France in 1942, an area that matched the photo's environmental analysis. What made his file stand out was not a major transgression, but a small note attached to his record, an accusation of mild insubordination and questioning of orders, which resulted in a light punishment and a transfer. To most historians, it would be an unimportant footnote, but to Elena's team it was a beacon. Men who question orders in a totalitarian regime are men who think for themselves. The name Klaus Richter gave a face to the shadow in the photograph, a character whose story they were now desperate to tell. With a name in hand, the team turned back to the other two men in the photo. If Klaus Richter was hiding such a monumental secret, who were his companions? Were they accomplices or threats? Their body language was re-examined in this new and dangerous light. The arrogant smile of the soldier on the left now seemed like a facade to hide his nervousness. The hand of the middle soldier, which rested on Klaus's shoulder, no longer seemed like a gesture of camaraderie. Was it a gesture of control, of protection, or a warning? The dynamic of the image changed drastically. They were no longer three equals. It was one man with a secret and two others who were somehow part of that secret. The photograph became a three-act drama, and the tension between the characters was almost palpable. Determined to extract every last fragment of information, they ran the AI enhancement on the background of the image, focusing on the blurry letters they couldn't decipher before. The result was even more shocking than the first revelation. The letters on the wall, now sharp, did not form the name of a village. They were part of a Latin phrase, painted over the entrance of a small chapel, Dominus vobiscum, the Lord be with you. And then, the AI performed its final magic. In one of the dark chapel windows, where there had once been only shadow, the algorithm reconstructed the pixels, revealing a ghostly image that had been hidden for 75 years. It was a face, small, frightened, with large dark eyes, the face of a child peeking from behind the curtain. The mystery was no longer just about Klaus, it was about who he was hiding. Like pieces of a cosmic puzzle falling into place after a long time, the full story finally revealed itself to the team of researchers. The image on the screen was no longer an enigma, it was a testament. Klaus Richter and his two companions were not ordinary Nazi soldiers. They were the unthinkable, heroes hidden within the very belly of the beast. The Star of David, the hand-sewn insignia, the tension on their faces, the chapel in the background, and most importantly, the child's face in the window. It all converged on a single stunning conclusion. These men were part of a secret resistance cell within the Wehrmacht, risking their lives every second to sabotage the Nazi war machine from within and save those the regime was dedicated to destroying. The photograph was the proof of their most courageous act. The act of posing for the photograph was in itself an act of genius and audacity. It wasn't a personal memento, but a coded message intended for a resistance contact in the neighboring village. The pose in front of the Dominus Vobiscum chapel was a signal that the package the Jewish family hidden inside was safe. The forced smile of the soldier on the left was a sign that the operation occurred under stress, with patrols nearby. The middle soldier's hand on Klaus's shoulder was a sign of confirmation. The mission was a success, and the Star of David on Klaus's wrist, visible only to someone who knew exactly where to look, was his signature, the proof that the operation had been conducted by the right contact. The photo was a receipt of life, a beacon of hope disguised as a portrait of tyranny. It is almost impossible for us today to comprehend the magnitude of the risk that Klaus Richter and his friends took. In a regime where the slightest suspicion or a misplaced word could lead to torture and summary execution, their actions were a direct and constant defiance of death. They were not only traitors to the Third Reich, in the eyes of their superiors and most of their peers, they were the worst kind of scum. Yet in truth, they represented the pinnacle of moral courage. They chose humanity over nationality, compassion over cruelty, and personal sacrifice over blind obedience. To live with this secret, surrounded by enemies wearing the same uniform, required a strength of character and an emotional control that bordered on the superhuman. Driven by the discovery, Eleanor's team published their findings in an academic journal. The story, however, was too powerful to remain confined to academic circles. It was picked up by the press and quickly went viral, a story of unlikely hope that captured the world's imagination. Weeks later, the Institute received an email. It came from an 82-year-old woman named Leah, who lived in Tel Aviv, Israel. "I am the child in the window," she wrote. "I remember those soldiers. I remember the face of the man you call Klaus Richter." The team was in a state of shock. The story had traversed the decades and found its living witness, the final, irrefutable proof that what they had discovered was real. In a video call that connected Munich and Tel Aviv, an emotional Leah told her story. Her family was being hunted when the three soldiers found them. Instead of turning them in, they hid them in the crypt of the small chapel for nearly a week. Leah remembered Klaus not as a scary soldier, but as the man who gave her a piece of his own bread and told her in a whispered Yiddish to be strong. She remembered the day they posed for the photo, telling her family it was a signal so they wouldn't lose hope. The photograph, once a symbol of oppression, was completely transformed by Leah's tears and memories. It became a sacred icon of survival and the unexpected kindness found in the darkest of places. Today, the photograph of Klaus Richter and his two comrades is no longer archived as an example of Wehrmacht propaganda. It is displayed in Holocaust museums around the world, a powerful testament to the complexity of history and the resilience of the human spirit. It teaches us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear the enemy's uniform. The image is a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the light of human decency can shine, and that a single act of courage can echo through generations. The story of the three Nazi soldiers who posed for a photo was finally revealed, not as a tale of evil, but as one of the most profound and stunning stories of secret heroism ever discovered, proving that by looking closer, we can find humanity in the most unexpected places. The identification of Klaus Richter, though monumental, only opened a new door of mysteries. Who were the other two men who shared his secret and his deadly risk? Elena's team returned to the archives, but the task proved to be exponentially more difficult. The faces of the other two, though clear in the photo, lacked Richter's distinguishing mark. They were 2 in a million soldiers, their names lost in a sea of bureaucratic records, many of which were incomplete or destroyed in the chaotic post-war years. Frustration grew with every dead end. It seemed that history had allowed a glimpse of the truth, but was determined to keep its other heroes anonymous, a painful reminder that countless acts of courage were performed and then swallowed by the silence of time, never to be recognized. Refusing to give up, Elena brought a new expert to the team, a forensic genealogist named Ingrid. Her approach was different. Instead of focusing on military records, she began to build a social network of Richter's unit. She scoured civil archives, church records, and post-war obituaries from the hometowns of the known soldiers in that company. The goal was to find letters or diaries that might mention the trio. Ingrid spent hours analyzing the handwriting in old letters, searching for any mention of Klaus and his friends, or any anecdote about soldiers who behaved strangely or were reserved. It was detective work at its most human level, trying to reconstruct bonds of friendship and trust from fragments of paper that had survived a century. Ingrid's work was meticulous and, for the most part, fruitless. The families they contacted were cautious, many still carrying the complex legacy of having had a relative in the Wehrmacht. However, the story of the photo of Klaus and the rescued child began to open doors. An elderly man, the son of a soldier who served with Richter, remembered his father mentioning a group of 3 friends who were inseparable and were nicknamed the priests for their quiet nature and for spending a lot of time near the local chapel. This small childhood memory was the first external corroboration that the trio's behavior was noticed. It was not concrete proof, but it was a thread of hope, suggesting that the camaraderie in the photo was genuine and rooted in a shared purpose. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In a Russian archive of captured German documents, a researcher collaborating with Elena's team found a combat report from Richter's unit, dated just 3 weeks after the estimated date of the photograph. The report detailed a partisan ambush in which several German soldiers were killed. One of the names on the casualty list was Corporal Franz Bauer, whose military file photo perfectly matched the middle soldier in the image, the one with the stern gaze. Suddenly, his tense expression took on a new and tragic meaning. He wasn't just focused, he was aware of the impending mortality of his mission. Franz Bauer couldn't tell his story because his life was cut short shortly after his greatest act of heroism. The identity of the third soldier, the one on the left with the enigmatic smile, remained a mystery. Despite all the team's efforts, no name could be linked to him with certainty. His face, forever preserved in silver bromide, became a symbol for all the silent, unknown heroes of the resistance. He represents the men and women whose stories of courage died with them on the battlefields or in the cellars of the Gestapo. The team decided in their publications to honor him as such, the unknown soldier of conscience. His anonymity did not diminish his heroism. On the contrary, it made it universal. He was proof that even in the heart of darkness, ordinary people whose names have been forgotten made extraordinary choices, planting seeds of humanity that would take decades to bloom. The story of the 3 soldiers was, therefore, as complete as history would allow. One named and celebrated hero, Klaus Richter, one martyred hero, Franz Bauer, whose courage was sealed by death, and one anonymous hero, whose legacy lies in his mystery. Together, they formed a more complete picture of internal resistance. It was not a single, isolated operation, but a brotherhood forged in the fire of secrecy and moral conviction. The photograph now told an even deeper story, a story of friendship, sacrifice, and the painful reality that not all heroes are given a name or a known grave. Elena's team's work not only uncovered a secret, but also revealed the complex and often tragic layers of historical memory. The connection between past and present was sealed in a meeting that transcended academic research. Dr. Elena Vogel traveled to Tel Aviv to meet Leah in person. In Leah's living room, surrounded by photographs of children and grandchildren, the two women embraced like old friends. Leah held a high-quality copy of the photograph and, with trembling fingers, traced the outline of Klaus Richter's face. "He had kind eyes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "In the midst of so many monsters, he was a man." For Eleanor, that moment crystallized the purpose of her work. The data, the pixels, and the files had transformed into a story of flesh and blood, and she was no longer just a historian. She was the keeper of a promise, the messenger who had finally delivered Richter's receipt of hope, 80 years late. The story spread, and with it, family connections began to emerge. The team managed to locate Klaus Richter's grandnephew, a music teacher named Thomas, living in Stuttgart. Thomas grew up with a shadow of shame over his great-uncles. Service in the war, a topic rarely discussed in the family. Upon receiving the news, he was incredulous. Then he wept. The revelation transformed his family's history. The silent, absent figure of Klaus Richter was re-signified, from an ordinary Wehrmacht soldier to a hero of humanity. Thomas traveled to meet Leah, and in the encounter between the savior's descendant and the survivor, a cycle of healing was completed. Klaus's courage had not only saved a family in the past, but had also freed a family from shame in the present. In Germany, the discovery sparked a significant public debate. German resistance to Nazism is often personified by figures like Sophie Scholl or the conspirators of the 20th July plot. The story of Richter, Bauer, and their anonymous friend shed light on a different, more widespread form of resistance: silent moral resistance. It showed that beyond organized plots, there were individuals and small groups who made ethical choices in their daily lives, often without any support network. Academics and the media discussed how this narrative challenged the idea of collective guilt, not to absolve, but to present a more complex picture, acknowledging that even within the most oppressive structure, moral agency and individual courage could exist, often invisibly. The small French commune where the chapel still stands, virtually unchanged by time, embraced the story as its own. The mayor, deeply moved, organized a campaign to create a permanent memorial. With donations pouring in from around the world, a simple bronze plaque was installed next to the chapel door. The plaque displays the photograph itself, engraved in the metal, with the names of Klaus Richter, Franz Bauer, and the inscription, "And to an unknown comrade." Below, a quote from Leah, "Where one man dares to be good, hope dares to exist." The photograph, once a secret hidden in a trunk, now became part of the landscape, a public monument inviting all who pass by to stop and reflect on the courage that blossomed in that unlikely place. The dedication ceremony was a solemn and international event. Thomas, Richter's grandnephew, stood beside Leah, who, despite her advanced age, insisted on speaking. With a firm voice, she addressed the crowd. "We are not here just to remember the past," she said. "We are here to make a promise to the future, a promise that we will see the humanity in each other, even when uniforms tell us to see enemies." These three men were not gods. They were men who chose the light. In every generation, in every nation, there is darkness, but always, always there are sparks of light. Our job is not to curse the darkness, but to find, protect, and become those sparks of light. Her words echoed through the square, transforming the memorial into a living beacon. In the end, the photograph's journey, from a dusty object to a global symbol, revealed a fundamental truth. History is not a static monolith, but a living organism, breathing through the stories we dare to uncover and tell. Dr. Elena Vogel's project, which began with algorithms and pixel analysis, ended in hugs, tears, and a deeper understanding of the human heart. The image of the three Nazi soldiers, once shocking for its secret, is now stunning for its enduring legacy. It reminds us that every life contains a universe, every moment is a crossroads, and the bravest choice often is simply the choice to be good, an act whose echo can, in time, shake the world.